Hello, everyone.
Hey there, folks.
This is Avery,
This is Rita.
and you're listening to I Don't Know Her, the podcast where we talk about women
And some other folks.
that you've probably never heard of.
But you should have, and today you will.
Correct. So we had a tough conversation today.
We did.
Will you enlighten the listeners?
I fucked up. You want me to share the entire story?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's helpful for the context of what we're talking about.
Absolutely. Well, obviously, for the listeners who've been with us for a minute, you know about Avery's transition and also the new name update. I was with good intentions, which was all bad things start. I put on my Instagram a picture of Avery that also shared to my Facebook tagged with Avery about they or them. This is their pronouns. I will correct you in public if, you misuse this. Very proud of them. Please, a big thing of welcome with the new name. I didn't know that most of Abby's family did not know.
Yeah.
And other friends and people who are all connected to Avery's Facebook. So I outed my best friend.
Yeah. Real publicly.
Very publicly.
I hadn't changed my name on Facebook. I had changed it on Instagram because that's the place where I spend the only social media. I use Twitter and I use Instagram, and that's it. And on Instagram I had changed my name, but I'm much more open on Instagram because my list of people who are following me is a lot more curated because I didn't get an Instagram until 2016 or 17. Whereas I've had a Facebook since 2005. So my Facebook has people from high school, college, my first jobs, randos that I've met at conferences, people I don't even know.
Yeah, it's Facebook land.
Yeah. And that's also where the majority of Abby's family is connected to me. The only people in Abby's family that I'm connected to on Instagram are the people our age.
Mm-hmm.
And her mother. But her on Facebook, I'm connected to literally every member of her family, from aunts to cousins to her sister's husband's parents. That's how many family members are on there.
And all of these people didn't know.
No, we hadn't even had a conversation even with her siblings yet. We were planning on it. We just hadn't figured out how to talk about it. It's just kind of a difficult conversation. And we were also just trying to find out the method. Do we FaceTime? Because we haven't also told them that I'm on testosterone. So these are things that we want to share. But we want to do so in a way and a time that feels correct.
Mm-hmm.
And we hadn't even figured out, is this something that Abby talks about alone, or do we talk about it together? Do we have her sister Sarah be the spokesperson who spreads the news? We just hadn't decided.
And I took that from you.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sucks.
It really does.
And obviously Rita apologized to me. But I felt weird about it immediately, and I didn't know how to talk about it. And that's even in our friendship, which if you've been listening for a while, you know that we do have tough conversations.
We do.
A lot. So it's rare that we find ourselves in a situation where we're I'm not sure how to broach this topic.
Yes.
What are you thinking? What are you feeling?
I feel really bad. I feel terrible. But I was very grateful that you told me because I know now a boundary for you that I need to not cross. And also a boundary of this. And I told Avery, this is your story. And I am just a person with the pom-poms on the side of the track. I'm not running the race, And I need to, and I think maybe sometimes other allies do this too, where we take that and we wear it and it's not okay. So I'm really sorry that like I was, and I told everybody the last thing in the world I ever would want to do is hurt them.
Yeah.
So very sorry about that. It sucks, but it's a learning lesson. I wish I could take it all. I wish I could take it all back.
Yeah.
Like, pull that pain out of you.
I know you were asking me like, well, what can I do? What can I, how can I fix it? And I was like, you can't. The cat is literally out of the bag. Its name is Avery and it goes by they them.
But I'm very grateful that you were honest with me, because
Yeah.
I would hate for you to just like be like living with it and never say anything. Because I know too, you probably, because I know you probably struggled and you're like, I don't want to make her feel bad.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Because
I
you know my heart is broken.
yeah, because I know that you were trying to be very intentionally good,
Mm-hmm.
and because I didn't know what was coming, it also blindsided me.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, holy shit, like I have barely told anyone, like at all, and had personal conversations. And then all of a sudden it was like, I found out when I was tagged on Facebook and there were like dozens of comments. And I was like, oh my God, literally everyone is seeing this. My high school English teacher is seeing this. And it was just really a lot to take. And I hadn't, like initially I was just like, I couldn't quite pinpoint what was weird for me. I was like, this just doesn't feel right. And then I shared it with a friend of mine who I trust really deeply, because she's like super great about approaching everything with kindness. So I was like, she knows you and she also loves you, and was like, oh, I know exactly what was going on, but yeah, that I don't think this is cool. And then I showed it to Abby, because Abby isn't on Facebook at all.
Mm-hmm.
And she was like, oh my God, my whole family. And I was like, oh fuck, your whole family. And she was like, and she wanted to have a conversation with the three of us, but you've been cat sitting a lot.
Yeah.
So we couldn't have that. And then we were having a whole conversation about somebody else. And it just was like, I need to take this window and say something.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was really tempted to just like not say anything and just let it go.
Why?
I have a really hard time standing up for myself.
But you know me though.
Yeah. I just have a hard time standing up for myself. If you had done something to Abby that crossed her boundaries, I would have no issue approaching you about
my
it.
eyes out.
Well, not that. I would just approach you about it and be like, hey, that thing wasn't really cool. Here's why. But I have a really hard time doing that for myself.
Mm-hmm. I understand that.
Yeah.
I totally get that.
Yeah. Like I do the same thing at work. I have no issue standing up for students. And like the other day, I called an administrator out.
Ooh.
I was like, you did not follow district procedure or state law in this situation.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, because I do know the law backwards and forwards at this point in order to protect my students.
Mm-hmm.
And I have no issue going to bat for them and putting myself on the line for them. And I just don't know how to do that for myself sometimes.
Yeah, I totally get that.
Especially with somebody I love. It's actually harder.
True, because there's like an intimacy there.
Well, and I don't want to make you feel bad, because then I feel bad for making you feel bad.
Oh, this is a whole shit show. I think it's okay for me to feel bad about hurting you. I think you should know that it's okay.
Right. And I would feel the same way if I had overstepped and you said, hey, you talked about this when I didn't, if I had like said something about your divorce or your relationship with Isai or something that really like crossed a boundary for you, and you said, hey, that didn't feel right to me, I would obviously feel really shitty.
Yeah.
But I would want to do better and be better. And no, I felt that way about our listener who came to us about the episode on, oh my God, I'm blanking on everything. Barbara Hillary. That felt really terrible inside, right? Because I want to do better and be better.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad that it was brought to my attention, because obviously I had fucked up and I needed to be better and do better. And I want to be better and do better.
Yeah. And that's exactly how I feel. It's just like, I wish there was something I could do. I know there isn't, but I know what to not do next time.
Right.
Yeah.
And also, I think because we have this public platform, we are able to do something by talking about it, so that if someone else is in a situation where they're like, oh, I'm so proud of my friend and I want to share all this good news, they might second guess it and go, you know what, maybe I should ask them first.
Mm-hmm.
And that might prevent this from happening to another friendship.
Yes. And possibly maybe not handled as well, and it ends a friendship.
Right.
Like, I would hate that.
Yeah, I think we should be proud of ourselves for our maturity.
Look how grown up we are.
Look at how good at this we've become.
Also, too, like, I want people to know, like, yes, I do feel bad. I'm not, like, gonna, how do you say it? Like, make you, like, come and hold my hand and be like, it's okay. Like, no.
Yeah, no. Yeah, there is that situation, I think, particularly with white women and people of color who, like, have gotten into a situation where, you know, because as we've talked about before, white women can weaponize their tears. And, like, that's a situation wherein, like, oh, I made you feel bad and then I'm crying, so now you feel the need to comfort me.
Mm-hmm. Which is not.
Yeah, that's not appropriate and it's not right. And I'm sure I have done it. Positive I have done it. And I would love to go back and erase those kinds of situations from ever happening, knowing better now.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not what you're doing here. And it's important to know the difference between somebody, like, you legitimately feel bad. You have apologized. You've taken ownership over what you did that you now understand was not awesome. And I feel bad in the way that's like, I don't ever want you to feel bad, just in general, because I love you.
Yeah.
But I'm also not, like, feeling ownership over you feeling bad.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Absolutely.
I know that that's yours to own. It just feels shitty to be like, hey, friend, I know you love me, but you did a thing that bothers me.
Yes.
It's always hard.
It's always hard.
Whether it's a spouse or a sibling or a parent or a friend, it always is hard to be like, I know you are coming from a good place, but you did a thing that didn't work for me.
Yeah. Ooh.
Big sighs. Big sighs.
Okay. I love you.
I love you too. And I appreciate your friendship and what you were trying to do. I know where you were coming from.
Mm-hmm. I will do better next time, I promise.
We all do better next time. You ready?
Right. I'm kind of excited.
I am going to tell you today the story of Tanya Zolotoroff Nash.
That is a name.
Yes.
Wow. Zolotoroff.
Yes.
Russian?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, Ukrainian.
Okay.
So this is a Ukrainian American activist for deaf people and deaf rights who dedicated 35 years of her life to creating safe spaces for deaf people.
That's awesome.
So she is actually a hearing person. So right up front, I'm going to lay out a couple of things.
Okay.
One, I think this feeds well into our conversation. It's hard to talk about an activist who is not part of the community they're advocating for.
Yes.
So I'm acknowledging right away that Tanya is going to be a little bit problematic from the get-go.
Okay.
She is a hearing person advocating for a community she doesn't belong to.
Mm-hmm.
And doesn't have, like, a relationship to. It's not like her parents were deaf or anything like that.
Okay.
So that's one. Two, she's also Jewish, and a lot of the work that she does throughout her life is for Jewish deaf people. It's another group I don't particularly belong to. So just laying it out there right up front that, like, I'm going to do my best to represent what Tanya was about while acknowledging that I have shortcomings in my knowledge of these two communities. And I'm trying really hard to just, like, not do what I did with Barbara Hillary.
Okay.
So Tanya Zolotoroff was born in Odessa, Ukraine on May 10th, 1898.
Whoa, okay.
Her family was relatively wealthy in Ukraine. It was hard to figure out actually because some people said Russia and some people said Ukraine. Like she specifically would talk about Russia, and I was like, wait, did you live in Russia or did you live in Ukraine? But she's a Ukrainian immigrant.
Okay.
And I think that she grew up in Odessa. So
Maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah, because her dad was actually, his employment was making fur hats. Like those big Russian fur hats.
Oh yeah. Iconic looking.
Yeah, super expensive and only really purchased by the Russian elite because that's the only people who could really afford it. So he was relatively well off because he ran this facility that made these expensive fur hats. He did a lot of fur trading, so on and so forth. So he was like connected to a lot of wealthy people. In fact, she recalled later on in life that her early years, she didn't know that they were wealthy until she was no longer wealthy because that was
just her reality.
Yeah, they had a cook. They had a nursemaid for each child.
What?
And there were 3 children at the time, 2 brothers and her. And so you can tell like they had a housekeeper, they had a maid, they had a housekeeper,
Yeah.
They had a cook, they had these nursemaids. So they had servants or whatever. Yeah. And so they like lived relatively comfortably at the time.
I would imagine.
In 1904, however, there was a war between Russia and Japan. And it was looming large. Like everybody knew that this was coming. And Tanya's father knew that he would be one of the first people drafted if they went to war. Because, 1, he had served in the army when he was younger.
Oh, okay.
And 2, he was Jewish.
Alrighty.
And anti-Semitism was super prevalent at the time, and Jewish soldiers were often intentionally placed in the most dangerous situations because they were kind of seen as disposable.
Oh.
And Tanya even described it later as being, quote, perfect for instant destruction.
Oh, gosh.
So Tanya's father was like, we got to get the fuck out of here.
Yeah.
He worked really hard to get the money to pay to buy tickets to get a ship to take them to the United States. And so at the age of 6, Tanya became an immigrant to the U.S. and settled in Brooklyn, New York.
Oh.
Life was obviously dramatically different for her here. Her family was immediately destitute, had no access to money. I think her father had, her mother or her father, I think, had a sibling who lived here, and he sponsored the family to come. But otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to come. And so I think they had like 1 or 2 connections, but like nothing significant.
Mm-hmm.
Her dad was able to get a job at a factory that made hats. It seems like they were ball caps, though.
Okay, so like way
different. Yeah. And also, he was on the assembly line. He wasn't like the person who managed the facility.
Isn't that how that usually goes, though?
Yeah, I mean, and they didn't speak English. Like the whole family just spoke Russian. So like you're already at a disadvantage when you walk in, and you can't, even if you can like conceptually look around and know what's wrong, you can't communicate to let people know what's wrong.
Yeah.
And that's really difficult. They were obviously plunged into poverty, and they tried to make up the difference by her mom would sell sweet potatoes in the park.
Oh.
Yeah. And I assume that means that like she would cook them and whatever. Like I don't think it was raw sweet potatoes because that seems like
very odd.
Yeah.
You want to buy this potato.
So at the time, early 1900s, imagine it. Early 1900s. Brooklyn, New York.
Ball caps. Assembly lines. War.
Birth control. Not easy to come by.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I don't know. Her parents must have been like the most fertile people on the planet.
Oh my gosh, how many more babies did they have?
Well, over the course of the years that Tanya was a child into her teenage years, her mother gave birth to at least 2 more kids. So that meant that they had 5 children. And she had 12 abortions.
Oh my gosh.
12.
12?
I was also like,
why didn't she just get sterilized? Or maybe that wasn't a thing?
I mean, also, like, that's scary, too. I wouldn't want to do that in the early 1900s.
Yeah.
And obviously, at the time, abortions were
not what they are today.
No, they were pretty crude, pretty
Yeah.
dangerous.
And she'd have to recover from each and every single one.
Mhm.
Oh,
And that experience for Tanya of watching her mother get pregnant over and over and over again and have to have these abortions really influenced her for the rest of her life. About immigration, about poverty, about reproductive rights.
mm-hmm.
And that will later come into play.
Okay.
The family didn't speak English, but two of her aunts were attending night school to learn English. And so Tanya was desperate to join and learn as well, but she was obviously too young. She was like 6 or 7 years old. So she convinced the teacher to allow her to be like a TA.
Oh, God.
Like filling coffee and like making copies of stuff and whatever, handing things out. But then she was able to sit in on the classes. And she was extremely bright. And languages came really well to her. Like she was very drawn to them and could learn them pretty well. And she was reading at a young age. She spent a lot of time in the library and taught herself how to read in English by using picture books and nursery rhymes.
Oh, wow.
And it paid off because she became exceptionally fluent in English, so much so that teachers were constantly telling her that she had excellent English. And when she was 13, she won a citywide spelling bee.
Oh, wow. So she knew.
Mm-hmm. And actually, that was a really interesting one. And I read her, she did an oral history. There's a ton of these at the Center for Jewish History. And it's a lot of people who survived the Holocaust. And they talk about their experiences in their life, and it gets transcribed, and it's really neat. So I got permission from the Center for Jewish History to have access to her oral history, which was 2 sides of 2 tapes. So tape A, tape B kind of thing. And she recalled in that oral history that when this happened, when she won the spelling bee, she actually couldn't attend the awards ceremony because the only shoes she had were in tatters and no one could afford to buy her another pair.
Oh, no.
Even though she was an exceptional student, because she was one of the oldest in the family, she had to drop out of school to be able to make money to help the family.
Yep.
So at 15 is when she left to go begin working. Her younger siblings later on were allowed to stay in school.
Oh, I bet that pissed her off.
Can you imagine?
That you had to cap your life so that to help, and then they get to continue
And
on.
then they get to reap the benefits, right? That would feel so shitty.
That would feel shitty. But I mean, if you love your family.
I'm sure when she was younger, she was pretty bitter about it.
Yeah.
But as an older person, she was like, oh no, I was happy to do it. She still really wanted to be educated, even if she couldn't do so in a school setting. And so she actually was really involved in not politics in the way that we think of it, but like political ideation, I guess.
Okay.
Is how I would put it. She, her family, even when they were in Russia, was really into the intellectual side of politics. They would have like people come to their house and they would have like almost like guest lectures. And people like their friends and family would come to listen to somebody talk about this idea. And they were socialists. And in fact, Tanya identified deeply with socialism. And when she came to the U.S., she sought that out when she got old enough. She said, however, in her oral history that her dad was not political. He was just really into music. And I was like, that makes no sense.
What?
Her oral history was done in like, oh man, what year was that?
He was just really into music.
I think it was what year was that? I don't know. I don't have the year written down, but I think she was relatively old. Her oral history, I have read a couple of these oral histories for other people, and most of the time they're like really coherent. This one was not. So I think she was pretty old. And her mind jumped around a lot, and it was not a clear thread. And I was just like, wait, because her other biographer talked about like these political conversations they would have in their home when she was in Ukraine.
Okay.
So I'm sure that her dad was in some way still political, even if it wasn't like actually in politics. In any case, Tanya began attending groups And one of those was the Brooklyn Philosophical Society. And she would go to the library a lot in the evenings because they would have speakers who would come in and talk about things. On one such night, it was interesting. Tanya found herself in a heated debate with another attendee to one of these talks. Felix Nash was a young man in training to become a rabbi, and this is what Tanya said about that night. There was a discussion about not working on Saturday. The Jewish people said we should not be working on Saturday. But there was Jewish people who were not religious, especially those who came from Russia. And so there was a debate. I don't remember what side I supported, but Felix was in this discussion, and I listened, and I didn't agree with him on one point. When they closed the library, we weren't finished. When we got out onto the street, it became a quarrel.
Oh, gosh.
We remained outside and kept on talking, and he took me back to my house. When my mother saw me with Felix, she asked, who was that boy? I said, he's a boy whom I met in the library. I didn't know him before, but I think you're going to be hearing about him now and then. I'm pretty sure you will.
That's cute.
And that was how Tanya met her love and future husband, Rabbi Felix Nash, and they married in 1927. So she was actually in her late 20s by then.
Nice.
That's like a decent age to get married.
Yeah. Like
we often hear about 11-year-olds or whatever
Jesus.
marrying at 13.
Mm-hmm.
So Felix, he was also a socialist. He was a deeply avowed socialist. And he was a student at the Hebrew Union Seminary in Cincinnati. And he became, I don't know what you would call it, like not certified to become a rabbi, but like whatever, all of the training and necessary to be officially called a rabbi. But he actually never had a congregation. He instead was drawn to social work. And that's what he decided to do. And it was through him that Tanya would eventually find her own life's work. In 1929, Felix was appointed to run what was then called the Society for the Welfare of the Jewish Deaf. So there was this organization in New York called like the Federation of Jewish Philosophies or something like that. And it was like a board of Jewish philanthropists, basically, who were then funding all of these other various little things, but they kind of oversaw them. So the Society for the Jewish Deaf, the Society for the Welfare of the Jewish Deaf was one such group that the Federation oversaw and like funded.
Okay.
So the group was in especially a precarious position at the moment that Felix was appointed in 1929 because of the huge stock market crash. And it had destroyed the livelihoods of a lot of Americans, and it hit the deaf community exceptionally hard because a lot of the deaf community at the time worked in like needlework or printing trades or whatever. So stuff that like didn't require you to communicate very often.
Okay.
And those were kind of the jobs that they were cutting down on. So
Sucks.
I want to pause here and talk a little bit about the history of deaf culture and deaf rights in the United States. Mostly. There is some other stuff around the world that impacts it. And I need to do that because Tanya and her husband were both hearing, and they spent their lives working with deaf people. And I think that it's important to know more about the community and the history because I just think you need to know the context of what's going on at the time. So I found this to be fascinating. Didn't know this before. According to Harvard's linguistics department, the first sign language that was ever created and regularly communicated in the United States was MVSL, otherwise known as Martha's Vineyard Sign Language.
Martha's Vineyard, what does that have to do with it?
I'll tell you in a minute. So it was really created somewhere around 1714.
Okay.
So before the United States was an official country.
Had no idea.
Yeah, so this is when we were still colonies, British colonies. So for reasons that no one has ever been able to quite discern, Martha's Vineyard had an exceptionally high population of deaf individuals.
Oh, okay.
As many as 1 in 4.
That is odd.
Yeah, real odd. Something was obviously...
Yeah, something in the gene pool maybe?
I don't know, because I was talking about that last night with Abby, and she was like, oh, there must be some kind of pollution or whatever. And I was like, yeah, but think about Spokane. We have this like really high incidence of multiple sclerosis here.
Mm-hmm.
We have like the leading per capita in the nation. And so it has been studied. Scientists have come. They have tested the water. They've tested the air. They've tested the soil. And there has been no real reason that they can necessarily tie to it. Because like Abby initially was like, oh, well, yeah, because we have the runoff from Kaiser Aluminum. And I was like, yeah, but Pittsburgh and Ohio,
Yeah.
their rivers were literally on fire. The Cuyahoga River was on fire.
Yes.
The toxins that were in those places definitely were similar, if not worse. And we don't have any, like, they don't have a huge incidence of MS. So there's something literally here, and we're not sure what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Scientists have yet to discover it. And that's sort of, I think, what happened with Martha's Vineyard.
Okay.
They don't really know why.
1 in 4. Staggering.
Mm-hmm. So the people who lived there created a sign language so that the deaf and the hearing folks could communicate with each other. And everyone in Martha's Vineyard spoke Martha's Vineyard Sign Language.
Interesting.
But France was really the country that propelled the idea of sign language as a whole language. And deaf education was actually like a thing that existed there that didn't exist pretty much anywhere else. And so French Sign Language became an official language in 1760. Have you heard of Thomas Gallaudet?
No.
So I used to watch this show. I think it was called Switched at Birth. Such a bad name. Such a bad name. But it was about these two girls who had been switched at birth, and they discover it when they're teenagers, and they start to like meet each other's families. But one of them is deaf, and the other one is hearing. And the show has a lot of sign language in it because a lot of actual deaf actors. However, the main character is not a deaf actor, which always really pissed everybody off. It's like when you have a trans character and it's played by
Yes.
what is her name? Elle Fanning or whatever.
Yeah.
And no, don't do that. So anyway, I had heard of Thomas Gallaudet because of that, because the main character goes to Gallaudet University, and I had never heard of Gallaudet University until then, and it's an entirely deaf college.
Oh, okay.
It's the only one. So Thomas Gallaudet was the first person to create an actual educational setting for deaf people in the United States. And he worked alongside Laurent Clerc, which is the guy in France. And he had helped establish the education for deaf in France. So together they opened what was called the Hartford Asylum for the Education and Instruction of the Deaf and Dumb in 1817. I know, I never loved...
Yeah.
We can all talk about that language. We know it's bad. But it was the first school that people were like instructed in sign language. And they actually combined French Sign Language, FSL, with MVSL, the Martha's Vineyard Sign Language, to create the first iteration of ASL, American Sign Language.
That's really cool.
And I didn't know that either, so I learned a lot of stuff. And Gallaudet went on to open up the first university for deaf people in 1864. It's around this time, though, so we're making good progress throughout the late 1700s to the mid 1800s.
Yeah.
And around the late 1800s, things take a turn. Eugenics.
Oh, God.
I know, that word just keeps coming up. But eugenics became a fairly popular social and political theory. And scientific. Like, it had all of these things going on. Philosophical, scientific, political. And eugenics was on the rise. And one of the biggest proponents of eugenics was inventor Alexander Graham Bell.
Really?
Mm-hmm. And he decided to go hard against the deaf.
What?
Yeah. He actually had a deaf mother.
Why would he go against something that was like part of his own family?
Good fucking question.
Huh. Interesting.
So he was a huge proponent of a term, another new term I learned called oralism. And oralism is the belief that speech and lip reading is superior to sign language, or what they called manual language at the time. And he believed that lip reading and speech should be taught over sign language. Like, kids should not be taught in sign language. They should only be taught in speech and lip reading in schools. So in 1880, Bell attended the Second International Congress on Education of the Deaf. And at the time, the big debate was, should we teach deaf kids in manual language, i.e. sign language, or speech and lip reading? And he spoke at this conference for 3 days.
Yikes.
3 days. He went on and on and on about how oralism is superior. And ASL advocates got 3 hours to talk about it.
What the fuck? Like, this is pertaining to their lives.
Yes.
And they only get 3 hours?
That Congress endorsed teaching oralism exclusively and banned sign language. And to this day, Alexander Graham Bell remains a very contentious figure in deaf culture and history for this role in the oralist movement, because that oralist movement still exists today.
Oh, wow.
After this, there were deaf people who endured incredible abuse at the hands of quote-unquote educators who subscribed to the oralism method. Deaf people who were caught signing would have their hands bound behind their backs. They would be forced to sit on their hands and tied to chairs. Some people were beaten. But beyond those extremes, those are awful and terrible, but I want you to think about what the long-term effects are of never being able to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
It's an incredibly isolating experience. Without a way to communicate, how do you live?
Yeah. How do you ask for things? How do you ask for help if you need something?
How do you go to a fucking grocery store?
Yeah.
And, like, if the clerk says to you, $12.95, if you can't see the number, what the fuck are you going to do? How do you pay for it?
So isolating.
Extremely.
Being physically bound, that is fucked up.
Yes. As if all of that weren't horrific enough, eugenics came into play again because the deaf were considered, quote, aberrations or defective. And a lot of deaf people were unknowingly sterilized throughout the late 1800s and into the early to mid 1900s. They would go in for childbirth. And after they gave birth, they would be wheeled into a room and no one knew, like they had no idea what was going on. And then they would wake up the next day and they were sterile.
Wow.
A lot of deaf people had their children taken away from them at birth. Like I'm reading the book right now, True Biz, which is a new book that just came out in the last month. And the author's last name is Novich, but I can't remember their first name. But the story is about sign language, basically. It's all about this school for the deaf, and it's set now. Mm-hmm. It's not a while ago, but peppered throughout the story is a lot of deaf history and deaf culture. And one of the things that the author talked about was that they would, like, even to this day, deaf people will give birth and the hearing nurses will be like, how will she ever hear her baby cry? How will she be able to take care of her baby? And it's like, it's 2022, dude. Yeah.
There are ways.
there are video monitors.
Yes.
Like, there are video monitors. And, you know, in the book, the character points out, like, how do you think we know anything in our house? We have like lights that flash.
Yeah. There's things for assistance.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God.
But that kind of ignorance, that idea that, like, oh, you can't be fit. And that was really popular, obviously, a popular feeling. And so a lot of people had their children unknowingly taken from them and they had no way to advocate for themselves because they couldn't communicate.
They couldn't communicate, yeah.
It's really bad. So I want you to now remember that we're talking about two hearing individuals who are not going to understand this entire context.
Okay.
It's in this period, though, that Rabbi Felix Nash and his very intrepid wife, Tanya, enter into the deaf community. Felix was put in charge of the Society for the Welfare of the Jewish Deaf, while Tanya was working at a newspaper bureau doing clippings, literally clipping newspaper articles. And that's when the stock market crashed. And Tanya realized that there would be lines of unemployed deaf people at the society. So she gave up her job to go volunteer to help. She started to learn sign language, which she practiced day and night very much to the chagrin of her husband, who was lying in bed next to her.
And just like
she's like doing the alphabet and then like hitting him and like, did I do that right? He's like, I'm trying to sleep. However, I will say that forever and ever and ever, everybody talked about how she was not actually very good at sign language.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh gosh.
I know. I find that actually very funny because she doesn't care that she was not very good at it. She just did it anyway, which is probably not great, but it's just kind of funny too. Tragedy struck though in 1932. So remember, her husband took over in 29.
Yeah.
In 1932, Tanya's beloved husband Felix died of a brain tumor.
Oh.
He was just 30 years old.
That is so young.
Yeah. But she was the one who knew how to run the society. So they asked her to be in charge.
Okay.
Which is also pretty fucking rad that a woman got put in charge of this organization after having not even graduated from high school.
Yeah.
So that's when she discovered... She took it over. She stepped up. She discovered, though, that the society was desperately underfunded. And she had really big ideas about what she wanted to do for people. So she started to pay for things out of her own pocket. This is a quote from her oral history. I paid the fare of the deaf who went to jobs after I found them. If a deaf person owed the union money, I contacted relatives and we got enough money for them to clean their record up with the union and get a job. So her heart is obviously in the right place.
Mm-hmm.
One of Tanya's goals was to make the organization open to people who were not Jewish. And she wanted to also help more people, more intersections of people. So she also opened up the organization to folks who were deaf and blind, as well as deaf and disabled.
Okay.
Tanya was relentless. This woman did not give up. She would physically walk the streets of the garment district and go door to door to every business to find jobs for deaf people.
Wow.
She also worked with a lot of new immigrants. A lot of the people that she worked with were new to the country. So I want to share one story with you. There was a man named Robert Swain who wrote a story for, I think, a deaf maybe magazine called Silent News. It doesn't exist anymore, I don't believe, that I could find. Robert Swain wrote about a deaf woman named Hilda Ratner, who was the matriarch of a family of mostly deaf people. And through very dangerous and heroic missions, she managed to get her family out of Nazi Austria and to New York, where they thought they would be welcomed and safe, but instead they were detained on Ellis Island for what would end up being 5 months.
Holy shit, that's a long time.
The U.S. did not want to let them in because they were deaf. The government believed that they would become a burden. And it was finally someone in their family who was already a U.S. citizen or was living in the U.S. contacted Tanya Nash. And she advocated for them in court and secured a loan from that Jewish Federation of Philanthropies I was talking about earlier to get them a place to live. And she found them an apartment and then found Hilda a job as a seamstress. And the family was able to take roots in New York and eventually prospered. And some of her children went on to become Harvard graduates with PhDs.
My goodness.
And UC Berkeley graduates in social work because they were inspired by Tanya.
That's amazing.
So Tanya did this kind of difficult and emotionally taxing work for hundreds of immigrants. She went door to door in immigrant neighborhoods also to find deaf women specifically and let them know about their access and rights to birth control. Because she wanted to help them not be in the situation her mother was in. She also was not above a little cheating here and there if it meant that she was helping people.
Oh, what did she do?
This is actually one of my favorite stories. In a 1987 New York Times article by Todd S. Purdom, a friend of Tanya's recalled one such cheat that she did often in federal court when she was interpreting for deaf immigrants who were working on becoming citizens. Quote, one of the favorite questions who was the third president of the United States, and you had to answer correctly in order to pass. No matter what the deaf person signed, her answer was always Jefferson. And the judge banged down his gavel and said, admitted.
Well?
And of course, by this point, she knew the answers to every single question. So no matter what people signed, she just said the right answer.
Wow. There you go.
I mean, so one of the other stories that people told about her kind of like skirting the lines of ethics
Yeah.
was a story that I found on the Jewish Deaf Community Center's website. And it said, quote, "In the early days, Tanya brought a couple of deaf job seekers to the needle trades for work, removed the help wanted sign from the windows, and paid the doormans 25 cents to let her carry them away."
Oh my gosh. That's a hustle.
Right. I mean, she was just...
She was just wanting to get it done.
And I actually really admire the fact that she was like, I'm not above being a little dirty to get this done.
How many people who are able-bodied do that to get jobs and stuff like that? It's
Right.
like, why couldn't they kind of skirt some
Right. And
some edges?
I think it reminds me of how I feel about like, I would do a lot for other, to help like my students. And that reminded me of that idea. It's like, she is definitely going out of her way. In 1951, the society changed its name to the Jewish Society for the Deaf instead of for the Society of the Welfare or whatever. And later, after prodding from Tanya to open up the society to non-Jews, it became the New York Society for the Deaf.
Nice.
According to her biographer, Robin Caddison Burson, Tanya, quote, helped plan and initiate the New York State Mental Health Services for the Deaf, the first such state-funded agency in 1955. Throughout this 35 years that she worked for the Society the New York Society for the Deaf, she helped deaf people secure medical care, lawyers, interpreters, birth control, psychiatric care, citizenship, jobs, and perhaps most importantly, offered a way out of social isolation. Under Tanya's leadership, the society produced a monthly newsletter called The Jewish Deaf that was meant to connect deaf Jews who didn't know anyone else. Tanya also made sure that deaf children had access to the same opportunities as hearing children, like summer camp. She would actually go to summer camps, secure spots, but she would travel to the camps before the deaf children came, and she would teach the hearing children basic ASL so that when the deaf children arrived, they could communicate with each other.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, really great. And
Yeah.
also, have you ever seen or experienced when a child sees a person who they perceive is different from them for the first time, like visibly different, like someone in a wheelchair or somebody who communicates differently or might have like a big scar? Children are not at all ashamed of being like,
no,
whoa, it's on that
pointing,
person's face.
Yeah.
And sometimes they get scared of people who like are perceived different, right? Like if they see somebody with cerebral palsy or something like that, and they're like, oh my God, that's scary to me. They're in this really big chair. Because children who have not been exposed to people of varying like races and all of the things that like, that's their first instinct is like, what is this person?
Yeah.
I don't recognize myself in them, and therefore I don't know what that is. So I think what she was really doing was, because some people, when they see sign language the first time, it like they're like, what's happening? It's why particularly Black deaf people are killed at a huge, like way higher rate by police because they're not understood.
Yeah. And adding on their race to the situation, obviously they're judged. They think they're
dangerous.
Yeah.
I remember reading a story about a deaf Black man who was killed by police because the police thought he was throwing up gang signs.
The fuck?
Because he was communicating with AASL, African American Sign Language. It's like, fuck.
That's awful.
So I think, she probably in her mind was just doing this thing where like now the kids can communicate with each other, but I think it also had the added benefit of allowing these kids to have exposure before deaf children showed up, because then the barrier there is already broken.
Yeah.
It's like,
then they get to participate now rather than sit there and question.
It's like we all know that children who have had exposure to a lot of different kinds of people then are not as like weird about it. They don't get scared as easily because they're like, oh, that person is just a person who's different from me. And so I think in this situation that helped a lot. You know, they're not like frightened by these gestures and, you know, because sign language is extremely expressive. It's the reason why it's an amazing language.
Yeah, it was one of my favorite parts of learning it.
It's also really economical. You know, there aren't as many filler words, and there are words that mean the same thing, but you gesture differently or you make a face differently in order to communicate the meaning behind it at that moment.
Oh, yeah.
And so, like, I really think that children would take well to it, but I think having had no exposure would probably have been a little bit frightened by someone gesticulating in their faces that they've never had before. So I think it's just a really smart idea. It's like we should all be like exposed to sign language and other cultural things that are different from.
Well, that's why I took it, was because the school offered French, Spanish, and then sign language.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's really neat. That's something I would probably never have access to.
Right.
Ever.
Our school does too. Our school offers 2 languages, Spanish and ASL. And our teacher at our school, he has deaf children, and so everyone in their family signs so that everyone can be included. And he is not a member of the deaf community, but he is, like, you know, adjacent, right? And also so the person that we had in the position before taught the alphabet and like how to sign the anthem, you know, just like kind of like, and I don't want to say rudimentary, but kind of. Whereas he's like really, really interested in people not only learning the language, but understanding deaf culture. So there's a lot of stuff that they're learning that kids before didn't learn. And I'm therefore learning it too. Like, I've just started to put a whole lot more deaf and hard of hearing books in our collection. Anyway, I think that was all a good choice. I mean, education is so important, and students need to be exposed to different ideas and cultures and ways of communicating and all of that.
I thought it was too, like, really fun because of how, like we were saying, how isolated they are in their community. And I recently had 2 deaf people come into my line, and they were talking to each other. And then I was talking out loud, but I was also signing a little bit. And then they were like, oh, like, you know, sign, like, and the look on their face, they were like all excited. How often would you run into that? Probably not.
When we were, there's a little pub bar, it's called the Union. And it's in the like Sprague area, like International District. And we were in there one night, and there was a deaf man, and he was signing to the bartender, and she was signing back, and then another bartender was signing. I was like, holy shit, this is fucking great. And then he, like, Abby and I and him, we started getting into a conversation, and we were like, Abby knows a little bit of sign language. I know basically nothing. I try my hardest, but I don't really know a lot. I'd like to know more. And so I was like using my phone to text stuff, and we were just having a great conversation. But a man came in while we were sitting there, and he was probably a little mentally ill, definitely inebriated, more than likely, based on his overall appearance, probably not housed.
Okay.
So we have an intersection of a lot of things happening. And he came in, and he was trying to get a seat. They were like, no, dude, you need to go. And he saw this. He started talking to the deaf man next to us. He was still at the door. And the deaf man basically like signed, like, I can't hear you. And the man was like, the fuck? What are you doing? What are you, you know, and like suddenly like went from 0 to 100, was like convinced that this deaf man was like mocking him or threatening him. It was very weird. And he was like, I'm gonna fucking kill you. I'm gonna fucking kill you. And I was getting pissed. And I was like, you need to go. And he was like, shut up, faggot. And I was like, the whole thing got real wild. But I was also like, oh, okay. I'm looking a little boyish today, I think. That's a joke, everybody. But it was really intense, very upsetting. And then the owner, like kicked him out and came over and told us to like calm down. And I was like, you don't get to tell me to calm down. That man used a homophobic slur against me and was like attacking a deaf man. Like,
yeah, that's a whole lot
we are right in our
rights violated right there.
We are right in our situation over here. Like, he was directing derogatory language at all three of us, and we are not okay with that.
No.
But in any case,
scary situation for that man.
I know, and we'd been having such a good night, you know, and it reminded me though that like even in a space where there were multiple people able to communicate with this man, like when he walks out that door, there are people like that who may not be in their right minds and then there are people who are in their right minds who like don't know what it's like to see somebody do sign language. Yeah. And so they're like, what are they doing? Why are they gesturing like that? I mean, it just was like really heartbreaking. I was like, that would be really hard. Like, we just need to we need to be better.
Yeah.
Like, our society needs to be better at recognizing sign language because it's putting deaf people in danger that we decide not to know it.
Yeah.
That sucks.
That does suck.
So back to Tanya. Tanya's crowning achievement came about in 1968 when she embarked on her most ambitious project. She said this about her motivations for the project. Quote, hearing people can go to the friend around the corner, the neighbor next door, but the deaf often have no one to visit and are terribly isolated socially. So she set out to build housing specifically designed with the elderly deaf in mind, a place that would be safe for them and cater to their needs and allow for socialization. The project would cost $5.5 million. Oof. Lucas, that's in 1968. How much money would that cost in 2022?
$5.5 million in 1968 is the equivalent of $44,390,000 in today's dollars.
Not only did she get the boards to agree to this project,
that'd be one convincing pitch.
So she got licensing, she got permits, she did all of this stuff. She also managed through a number of public hearings to secure 100% mortgage financing, which meant that the Federation and the society didn't have to put down a single penny.
Holy shit.
And it was a 50-year mortgage at just 1%.
Holy shit.
Interest.
Oh my God.
So that meant that the housing in this complex would be able to start and stay affordable for half a century to come. After securing the project, Tanya retired from the New York Society for the Deaf 35 years after she took it over. But she wasn't done yet. Her housing project had just gotten started and she needed to see it through. So it seems like they broke ground in 1968, and then they finally finished the 137-unit apartment towers in 1974. The Tanya Towers became the first public building named for a living private citizen, who happened to also be a woman, a Ukrainian immigrant. Each apartment, and this is in 1974, each apartment is equipped with a visual announcement system. Green lights flashed when a visitor rung the bell. A red light flashed when there was a fire or any other kind of dangerous situation. There was also CCTV monitors, closed-circuit television, in each of the apartments that showed the entrance and hallways so you could see who was coming to visit you. Mm-hmm. The phones were also equipped with teletypewriters, TTW, or TTY, which were the basically an early text messaging system. Mm-hmm. Even the doorways were designed to be wide enough to fit wheelchairs through. And that, of course, was very appealing to a lot of people, particularly elderly, if you think about it. And one whole floor was leased by the United Cerebral Palsy Society of New York City. And it's important to note that all of this is happening and opening in 1974, but she started it in 1968.
It took a minute.
a full 22 years before the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Oh, whoa.
That required things like
that.
wider doorways.
Wow, she's ahead of her time.
Right? When it opened, folks could rent a studio apartment in the Tanya Towers for $152 a month.
I want that.
Or a one-bedroom apartment for $192.
Nice. Very nice and affordable.
Extremely affordable. It was designed specifically for low-income people, right? So they did have income levels. You had to make $9,000 or less a year if you were a single person, or $10,000 or less for a couple. But they're also elderly. So more than likely they're living off of
Social Security
and retirement and stuff like that. So I imagine that there were quite a few people who met that criteria. And it wasn't exclusively for deaf people. There were hearing people who had apartments in there as well, but it was primarily deaf folks who lived in the building. Tanya continued to help fundraise and acted as a consultant for the society until her health prevented her from being active anymore. She died on July 10th, 1987, at the age of 89. At her memorial service, more than 100 people came to share anecdotes and tributes to Tanya Nash, both the deaf and the hearing, all of whom signed while sharing their stories. One of the favorite stories that people told often was of the time that Tanya visited Helen Keller in the hospital after Helen had had a toe amputated.
Oh.
She had like a virus or something in her toe.
Okay.
Tanya signed to Helen. And remember, Helen was blind and deaf. So all of the signing was done in the palm of her hand. She said to Helen, "I'm so glad it was your toe and not your thumb, because if it were your thumb, you'd have a speech defect."
Oh, gosh.
And apparently Helen Keller thought that was the most hilarious thing she'd ever heard. Her friends and family remembered her as funny, eccentric, generous, stubborn, and always loving. And you remember that deaf woman I told you about who escaped the Nazis and Tanya helped off of Ellis Island? Well, her daughter Nellie Myers shared this with the Jewish Deaf Community Center. Quote, "My family of 4 was stuck on Ellis Island in 1940. My mom loved Tanya a lot. She helped us by going to Ellis Island almost every day and asking the judge to let us come into the U.S. Because 4 of us are deaf, they knew nothing of deafness. Tanya told the judge that the deaf people can do anything except hear. The judge let us go free." And in fact, Nellie and her mother moved into the Tanya Towers when it opened, and that's where they stayed until the mother's death. Tanya Zolotoroff Nash rose up from exceptionally difficult circumstances and dedicated her life to helping people who struggled in different ways to find their feet under them. She called herself, quote, unselfish. She wasn't perfect. She never bothered to really learn sign language, which I find a little bit grating.
Yeah, but I mean, maybe she was busy doing a lot of stuff. Maybe tighten it up a little bit.
Yeah, I wish that she had tried harder in that regard.
Yeah.
And also, in her oral history, as I was like listening to it, there was some patronizing ways in which she spoke about the deaf. And I am already gonna say that I was trying so hard this whole time to try not to take on that tone, and I know I'm not sure I succeeded the entire time while I was talking about this. I promise that's not how I feel. I was just trying to explain, like, especially at this time, there weren't things like cell phones. You couldn't communicate as easily, and it was important. Her work is important, and that there are many deaf people who were working as hard, if not harder than Tanya, and also need their spotlight. And so when I find a really good one, I'm going to bring that to your attention. So obviously, saying all of that, Tanya was not perfect, but she did incredible work to make New York City a more accessible place for the deaf. And I think that is important. And I also really wanted to talk about a Ukrainian person.
Absolutely.
At this moment in time.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the story of Tanya Nash.
That was really fascinating.
Yeah, a lot of stuff I didn't know.
Yeah. I did, when I did take ASL, I was taught by a deaf woman, and she would bring us, like, stuff from her house to show her, like, how she lived and, like, how she would do, like, her day-to-day stuff. So, like, the TTY and stuff like that. Like, she brought her phone, and we all got to, like, look at it and see it. And so, like, everything that you're talking about is just, like, bringing me back, because she was, like, Because we were like, well, how do you get up in the morning? Like, you don't have an alarm, you know? So she brought her alarm.
And it flashes.
Well, it flashes and it's a disc. And it would go like, brrr, it would vibrate.
Yeah.
And you put it under your pillow. And I was like, that's fucking genius.
Literally, that's how I wake up.
Yeah. Is your phone?
I have a Apple Watch,
Yeah.
and it vibrates on my wrist.
Yep.
So that's how I get up in the morning.
Yeah. And it's like, they're, like you were saying, like, well, how are they ever going to, well, there are ways.
Well, and it's just, it to me, when people say stuff like that, it just shows the limits of their imagination.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's like when people are like, well, how do two women have sex? I don't know, fucker. You're apparently not doing it right at your own house then. Because there are a lot of things you can do. And I just feel the same way. It's like you've determined, when you ask a question like that, you've determined that there's only one right way to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just so limiting to everything, to yourself, to the world, to people who are different from you. And I hate that mentality.
Yeah.
I'm of the mind that I want to know. I want to know more. Like, okay, so, oh, you have a little device that you can like put under your pillow or attach to your bed and it makes it vibrate. How fucking rad is that?
Yeah.
I would rather wake up like that than like, you know, I mean, when I got my Apple Watch and I thought it was going to be a regular alarm and it's a buzzing that vibrates on your wrist and that's what wakes you up. I was like, oh, I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I wake up at 5:30 in the morning and Abby doesn't get up till 6:30 or 6:45. So now that mine no longer makes noise, I can get up and not disturb her and she can continue to sleep. Brilliant.
Well, that was really cool. Thank you for sharing that.
I think one thing I didn't talk about that I wish I had, and I want to make sure I mention it, is that there are people who are deaf, as in like they have the physical condition of not being able to hear, and that's lowercase d. But most of what I'm talking about is uppercase D deaf, which is like a whole culture and community. And there's a lot of stuff in learning about all of this stuff that like I said, we just don't have a lot of awareness of in the hearing world.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we should have more of it. And I'm learning so much and I'm on my journey to understanding more. And I think it's important that we all kind of figure that stuff out.
Do our part.
Yeah. And one of those was understanding, like, you know, those videos of when babies or young people get cochlear implants,
mm-hmm.
and they hear their mom's voice or whatever, and like it's all these like feel good videos.
Mm-hmm.
I'm learning now that cochlear implants are actually like fucking bad. Like I
didn't know that.
I knew there was a lot of people in the deaf community, capital D deaf, who are like against cochlear implants or whatever for various reasons. And I always thought it was like because of that perception that it's like there's something wrong with you that we need to quote unquote fix.
Mm-hmm.
And that is part of it. But actually it's because cochlear implants like basically don't work.
What?
Yeah, like for most people they don't work. They don't actually do what they're supposedly doing. And they often cause a lot of other issues like headaches, nerve problems, all of this other stuff. And so it is hearing parents usually putting them on their deaf children because they want them to be like them. And that's sort of a fucking problem. Do they work for some people? Yes. And everybody's within their rights to try whatever methods they want to help themselves in whatever way they want. Truly. But I feel like we've been sold a bill of propaganda about like how amazing these things are and how they're so wonderful. But like there was like a 2-decade span of time when cochlear implants did not work at all. And they were continuing to put them into children and young people. And we were being fed a pack of lies.
Yeah.
And deaf people knew this whole time they weren't fucking working. So, but nobody was hearing them.
Yeah.
And
tragic.
yeah, when I found that out, I was like, are you kidding me?
My God.
Fuck that. It would be like if we put faulty pacemakers to help people's hearts. We would know. If like people were just dying
100%.
of fucking heart attacks or having like nerve pain and heart pain from them, we would all be like, oh, well, we shouldn't be putting those in people anymore.
Makes sense.
But we're continuing to basically torture deaf people with these cochlear implants, which oftentimes don't do anything for them, really, because it distorts sound.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't sound like real sound. So like, I was reading a whole piece about how this person was had a cochlear implant when they were like 3 or 4 years old, and they were terrified of people talking. Like when people talked, they would get scared, and it was because everybody sounded like a monster, basically. Like wind in the leaves would sound like screaming because it would distort the sound.
That doesn't sound like fun.
No. So for them, they thought hearing was scary.
Mm-hmm.
Like it, because what they were actually hearing is not like the sounds that hearing individuals hear.
Yeah.
It was distorted sound. And if I think about like what it would be like to walk around the world and everything is making just like terrifyingly loud, abrasive noises, I would not want to hear that either.
Yeah.
And that is often what happens. They feel like some people describe it as sounding blurry.
Mm-hmm.
So everything comes out just kind of garbled.
Okay.
And muffled. Some people have like completely distorted sounds. Obviously it's hard to know what people are actually hearing because they don't have anything to compare it to and we can't hear what they're hearing. So very rarely though does it appear or seem that people are hearing the like sounds matching what they're hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So the more you know.
Oh, I had no idea.
Me neither. So let me talk to you about some of the stuff I used. I used the oral history of Tanya Nash, who was interviewed by Judy E. Tanner for the Center for Jewish History. Thank you to the Center for Jewish History for allowing me to be a researcher and have access to that material. A chapter from the book, Marching to a Different Drummer, which I love this book. Unrecognized Heroes of American History by Robin Caddison Burson. A New York Times obit by Wolfgang Saxon. A Tanya Towers Apartment article on the Jewish Deaf Community Center's website. The Articulate Friend of Deaf is Recalled by Todd S. Purdom for the New York Times. An article about the Tanya Towers on the New York Times. The National Association for the Deaf History. A Mother's Courage Defied the Nazis by Robert Swain for Silent News. And Wikipedia.
Awesome.
And
Very
that's
good.
the
Very
story
nice.
of hearing deaf activist Tanya Zolotoroff Nash.
Good job.
She also explained in one article that her name, Zolotoroff, her given name, was, it's like in Russian or something. Zolot means gold. So basically in English, her name would be Goldman.
Oh, okay.
Because like the Rof or whatever is like the person of gold. So Goldman.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I was like, oh, I love language. And I think that's why she explained that, because she was super into language.
Mhm.
Like she just thought
Loved
languages
it.
were neat. And I was like, well, I mean, she was not necessarily fluent, but she spoke 3 languages.
Mm-hmm.
Russian. Actually, she probably did 4, because Russian, she probably spoke Ukrainian and Russian.
Yeah.
And then ASL and English.
Very cool. Fascinating lady.
Yeah, really cool.
Yeah. Good work on her too.
Thanks. And thank you for listening, everybody, and for supporting us. Don't forget our Patreon. We are working on our next bonus episode. It might come in late just because of schedules with our folks, but I'm pretty sure it'll be on time. It is an interview with a podcaster who has pivoted her podcast to be about autism, which she was diagnosed with not later in life, but later than average. And I think you'll enjoy it. So please listen to that.
Also want to say thank you to Lucas McIntyre, our wonderful editor.
And thank you to Jennifer Finch for our kick-ass theme music.
All right, folks.
Until next time.
Bye.
Goodbye.